Hello and welcome to Digital Marketing Musings, hosted by Merkle. Each episode, we choose a different expert to discuss the latest and greatest in digital marketing.
Today, Ilon Weeldreyer is back with us again to give us an update on where we stand on changes to digital privacy heading into the end of the year. This is a follow-up to several episodes that we have published earlier this year, so if you hadn't had a chance to listen, go back to episodes 6 and 8 to catch up on the conversation. I'm Gaia Reed.
And I'm Andreah McCartney.
And this is Digital Marketing Musings.
Thanks for tuning into Digital Marketing Musings. Today, we're joined by our cookie expert, Ilon Weeldreyer, who's going to give us an update on where we stand with the changes to digital privacy heading into 2022 and what considerations there are for advertisers.
Ilon has been with Merkle since 2015 and is an associate director of performance media. He's worked with clients in B2B, entertainment, retail, financial services, and nonprofit. Welcome to the show, Ilon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
So last we spoke in March and April of this year, Chrome had announced that in early 2022, they were deprecating the use of the third-party cookie. And advertisers at that point were still grappling with necessary actions following the passing of several significant pieces of legislation around digital privacy, including GDPR and CCPA. So what has changed in terms of cookie deprecation, Apple iOS updates, and general privacy policy more broadly in digital marketing since earlier this year?
When we had last spoke, we, I think, introed those sessions with a lot of caveats that there was going to be a lot that was going to happen and a lot that was going to change, so that what we said that day might be wrong the very next day. And a lot of those caveats still hold true. We do know more now than we did back then, but there is one thing that remains true, which is a lot is changing and a lot has yet to be settled. So we'll give those same caveats. Who knows what the landscape is going to look like in 6 months? We do know some updates that we can share, so we'll be happy to share those today. But just try to keep that in mind as we talk through things. So what we've learned is that everyone is still figuring this out. It's a very large global group project. Even though Google was the instigator of the most industry disruption with saying that the Chrome third-party cookie was going to go away, they weren't the only player. Apple came out with their ATT early in the year, and the solutions for the Chrome cookie deprecation being the privacy sandbox, that has a lot of global players. So it's not just Google, it's not just Apple. This is a very large project where digital advertisers are trying to address this desired balance between user privacy and productive advertising. So that is something that's become very apparent because a lot of the timelines that were stated at the top of the year have been pushed out quite a bit. A lot of the solutions that were being talked about early in the year aren't much further along as far as being in final state. They have had some origin trials and such, but where we thought we might be optimistically when we talked about this 6 months ago, we are not very far along. So a few specific things. The privacy sandbox, which is this series of API solutions that a lot of parties are working on with Google, that timeline has been pushed back a few times. They update it each month. And right now, the actual deprecation of the third-party cookie is looking to be in the back half of 2023. So that timeline got pushed back a lot. And if we were to think about how much that's changed just here in the first 6 months since the last time we spoke, we can probably expect that to be pushed back even even more if we were to think about it, just because of all the things that are going to happen. These solutions are going to get rolled out, they're going to get tested widely, and then there's going to be feedback, there's going to be adjustments. Some other things that Google has said that they were going to deprecate in the past, other types of IDs, have gone on for years past their original date of deprecation. That's not to say we shouldn't prepare for mid-2023 as being the point we want to be entirely in a good place as far as our efforts are concerned, but it's already been pushed back basically a year and a half. So we shouldn't be surprised if it gets pushed back again. A lot of the answers that we thought we had early in the year have also experienced little tweaks. So teams even within Google who, and if you recall, the Chrome team is separate from the marketing platform team. So a lot of times when Google or any other partner is trying to talk about these solutions, talk about what they think might be happening, just because they're part of the overall Google family doesn't mean that they always have this. So one very interesting thing, and it's a great thing we gave this caveat that what we say today might be wrong tomorrow. We had done this episode, and one of the outstanding questions that at the time we thought we had the right answer on was what was the interpretation of the first-party cookie, right? So at that point we had an answer from a few reliable people and parties that at that point remarketing would still work, Google's ad server and measurement would still work. And again, this is no fault to anyone, but we found out that is the incorrect interpretation. The very next week, actually, we found that out. And the reason we found that out, and the reason advertiser, I have this Google Floodlight on my page, and I'm going to be using it to build remarketing lists. I'm going to be using it to measure conversions. I'm the first party. This should work, right? It's Google. Google's going to go out there. They're going to place their cookies. Shouldn't they be able to tie those cookies to some activity on my site? The reason why this is not the way it's going to work is because it's from the perspective of the publisher and not the advertiser. So in cases where a user goes out and they see an ad anywhere other than the publisher site, anywhere other than the advertiser site, okay, which is basically all the time, that is considered a third-party exposure. And so they will not allow those type of cookies. This is a big thing, and it makes a lot of sense now why they're having these solutions of Flock and Fleege, is because those first-party interpretations of things like remarketing just that's not how it's going to work. So that is a great example.
Can you just do a quick recap of what Flock and Fleege are, just for the non-SEM folks in the room?
Flock and Fleege are the privacy sandbox API solutions. Flock for essentially what prospecting is right now. Fleege for essentially what remarketing is right now. So remarketing is not going to be persistent in the manner it is right now, because those are not going to be considered first-party cookies. They're going to be still considered third-party cookie experiences for the user. And so that Fleege solution is going to be the privacy sandbox solution for remarketing. Does
Perfect.
that answer?
Thank
Yes,
you.
of course. And that stands for things. I'd have to go back and look it up. I think it's federated learning of cohorts, and then Fleege is like first something, experiment something something. Again, these are all bird names. They all have variations. They're not just Google. Sparrow, all these other parties have all their variant names. So that's a great example of how things change super fast. People are they're still trying to figure out exactly what all of these things mean and what they're actually going to look like in the final state. So all of this collaboration. A lot of it's done on GitHub. They have, it's all open source type stuff. And so it's really them trying to move the ball forward as a group. We have this idea, all of these things we like to say often. We're building the plane as we're taking off. We're building the plane as we're flying it, right? All these things. There's this idea that yes, we need to be privacy compliant. Yes, we still need to do digital marketing well. And I think that's where everybody has everyone's best interest in mind. And so anytime that we have these misinterpretations, or it seems like people are being cagey about answers, it's because people are just trying to figure this out and what it actually looks like. And as we go along, we get more answers, we get things to be clearer, but it is going to take a while. And when things are rolled out, there might be lackluster performance, or it might not look as we thought in some cases, but eventually it'll get worked out. Eventually we'll have some sort of solutions to test and roll out broadly. Some of the alternative ID solutions that are being developed, so if we think about like UID 2.0, what they're doing at this point, whereas early in the year this is still very much in the phase of this is the idea that we have, this is the solution that we have, and this is how it works, this is the idea we have, and adoption at that point was pretty low. We're starting to see things where that's being adopted more and more. So definitely with things like publishers and with DSPs and other partners, and then how much that extends to other publishers and how much publishers adopt UID and all of that, that will really determine how interconnected everything can be based on an alternative ID. There is still a lot of discussion about how well that would survive as well, in terms of how many pushes there will be toward trying to eliminate as many identifiers as possible in this pursuit of ultimate privacy. But the determination of, or the level of adoption by all parties, from the buy side to the sell side, with something like one of those alternative IDs, will be very key into how interconnected and how resilient those alternative solutions are, whether based on an email or any other identifier. Another great example is, all right, so we're going to do these things called flock and fledge. Cool. These are going to be privacy compliant. Okay, cool. According to whom? Almost immediately,
It's a great question.
Yeah, almost immediately, the European groups just said, no, this is not adequate for our policies. So you had mentioned GDPR. It got quashed pretty quickly. So will solutions become present in global regions differently? Most likely. So whatever actually comes live in the US in terms of things like flock and fledge could possibly have different versions between what goes live in the US versus what goes live in Europe. And the things that get tested will probably be tested in the US before they get tested in Europe, or some version gets tested in Europe, just because we're a little bit, we have a little more flexibility here in the US. So, as a general statement between what has happened in the past 6 months and how people are adapting to it and dealing with these things, that is the general nature of the landscape as it is right now.
Sounds like there's been a lot going on.
There's a lot, and then not a lot we can say about it. Definitively.
Yes, of course. I mean, like, to your point, we're building the plane as we're taking off, sort of thing, which is a little bit terrifying. Like, if it were like that was exactly what was happening, like we're all building a plane as we're taking off. But, and as an analogy, it makes a lot of sense.
The good thing, so depending on the situation, you can feel more secure with some things versus others.
Right.
Google, probably pretty secure, because they've stated we are not going to deprecate the cookie until we have solutions in place. And we're all thinking, thank you, Google. We appreciate it. Okay.
Yes.
Then there's situations like other large digital entities where they just roll things out and they're saying, and their timelines where they push things back are not as generous. So things like the ATT rollout with Apple 14.5 earlier in the year. That certain aspects of that were delayed a little bit, but they pretty much stuck to their guns, and we did see impacts to that. So big impacts we're seeing to like mobile measurement partners, Facebook. We saw some sizable impacts to things like our remarketing audiences.
Yep.
We saw some sizable impacts to some other aspects of what we did. Now, the reason I say there are things we feel more secure about versus not, so there tends to usually with these things be a decent amount of hand wringing, sky falling sort of, worrisome take.
Chicken Little. Yeah.
And yeah, and there definitely are some impacts, and we need to be prepared for that. And the thing that everyone would like is a silver bullet, would like an answer right now, ahead of when some sort of deprecation happens. And a lot of times we can prepare as best we can, but a lot of times, or I should say always, we don't know the true impact until after it happens.
Right.
And we can assess things. So we can have sort of a good idea of what's going to happen, but we can't always say exactly what's going to happen, because things might impact one advertiser differently than another. It might impact one platform differently than another, because there's so many different factors.
Right.
But with that, what was interesting is, so Facebook saw an impact of things like remarketing audiences and some of these other things. Also conversion tracking, same deal. But what's interesting is that we didn't necessarily see it in some cases, we didn't see difficulty in delivery or CPMs. I mean, we saw some indicators that we may see like elevated CPMs in some cases, but because the algorithms are so powerful in the way that campaigns are structured now, where they have flexibility, if you have your campaigns structured to best practice, they can do things like adapt to audience sizes. They can do things like adapt to delivery between devices or platforms. So depending on how your campaigns are structured also can be impacted by this. Or if they are very granular, if they are very siloed, you're going to see some more immediate and direct and visible impacts. If you have your campaigns built out in aggregate, which is a lot of like best practice nowadays, your impacts won't be as noticeable, won't be as apparent, just because of the flexibility built in there.
That's a really big call out.
That's as needed by the advertiser, right? If there are certain things that an advertiser is doing that require those, you can't get around them.
Right.
But there are mitigation factors that one can take.
Kind of building off of that idea, what impacts are you anticipating for marketers heading into 2022 that they should be aware of?
And even 23.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So we just talked about this timeline, and over the next year, it's still more of the same, where you're just trying to prepare as soon as possible. So a lot of the things we talked about at the top of the year still hold true, where you're going to want to test out a lot of solutions that are available to you, test out different forms of measurement. You're going to want to build your first party data, all this stuff. The impacts that you're going to see between now and mid 2023, you may not see as many direct impacts yet, as I just mentioned, until after the cookies are actually deprecated. What platforms are trying to do now is, in the interim, build up and refine the solutions as best as possible so that transition is as smooth as possible. Things like modeled conversions. So Google started doing this at the end of last year, I think it was back in October, somewhere in there, where they started building in modeled conversions to a lot of their platforms. This was already being done by other partners. Facebook does it now in their platform as well. I think they introduced those at the top of this year maybe. And so you can see these partners starting to prepare for a world in which a lot of data is modeled, and a lot of data, whereas before was deterministic, where it was actually tied to an ID, exposure to a conversion. A lot of that is going to be projected data or modeled data, probabilistic data. So the impacts that advertisers are going to see between now and 2022, now and midway through 2023, you might not see as many impacts as you would expect, but after the deprecation, that is where you're really going to be able to tell how much of my performance at this point is being accommodated by the modeling. How much will the modeling change at that point? I think is another good question to ask, because the amount of modeled conversions that are being added in right now isn't that great. When you look at the comparison between actual conversions and model conversions, it's not that great right now, but we should expect that to happen when that transition happens. So when that deprecation happens, advertisers can probably expect to keep an eye on their reporting, and don't be surprised if there's a period of time, maybe weeks, maybe a couple months, while those algorithms figure out what's going on and they replace those lack of conversions with model conversions. But between now and then, you probably won't see too much. A lot of the solutions that they're building out currently still incorporate cookies. So the cookieless solutions, they currently incorporate cookies. So those will probably still be okay until the deprecation actually happens, and then you might see a bit of a drop off in terms of targeting or that sort of thing. But until that actual deprecation happens, we won't know for certain.
And I know a lot of our conversations on the show have been focused more on performance media, but we'd probably be remiss to not at least add in commentary from our email friends who have taken a pretty significant hit to some of the metric tracking that they have available with the Apple rollout specifically. I know there have been some blog posts that Merkle has put out, and we can link to those in the show notes, specifically around being able to measure open rates on Apple devices and not being able to see the click to open rates anymore for those devices, as well as the rollout of like these like burner emails that you can create, which makes it difficult to map people together in an identity graph. So it's definitely having a different effect channel by channel that marketers should take account of. So more broadly, what are the anticipated impacts over the next few years as these industry changes go into effect?
We should expect that there's going to continue to be a tug of war. So there will be parties that continue to push the envelope of what to remove in the bid stream. So IDs that right now are not cookies, so things like mobile IDs and IP addresses and other things might continue to get seen as opportunities to further advance privacy by their removal or attempt to remove them. And whereas we had a relatively stable period of time before the past year or two, we are in and entering probably a period of time that's going to be very new, a lot of changes, because this is not going to be resolved anytime soon. And the approaches that we are going to be taking, they're not going to become mature for quite a long time as well. So we should expect in the next 5 years to see a lot of change, and that people are going to need to be flexible, they're going to need to remain adaptable, consider solutions that aren't fully baked yet, possibly, and that's basically it. Expect a lot of change. There's going to be things that come into the fold that become a normal part of a portfolio or a normal part of an approach that 6 months later might be dropped or might be changed in some way. So I would just say a lot of change. Be prepared for a lot of change. A lot of, I think we might talk about this in a little bit, but things that that advertisers may have used in the past and then passed on. So things like MMM or some other alternative forms of measurement where they said, nope, we tried this out, we still got the cookie, we're fine for now. They may see those things come back, but just be prepared for a lot of change.
So when we previously spoke about the ways advertisers could help their programs with these changes, things like leaning into more first-party data usage with ad targeting, better using site, app, loyalty programs to drive their first-party data, those sorts of things. Have we seen more advertisers take action on these recommendations or examples at work, or is this kind of a holding pattern? What are you seeing out there?
I think with the news that the timeline got pushed back, advertisers haven't been as pressed as I would have expected earlier in the year. A lot of the recommendations still remain the same, but they have the level of experimentation, the level of adoption, I'd say, has been a little bit slower, and it depends on, I think, how active that advertiser was in trying to be cutting edge in the first place. So if they were advertisers where they're like, yes, we always want to be testing the new thing, all that stuff, they are eager to test these new solutions. Those that are pretty conservative, they're always worried about efficiency, and that really limits the amount that they can experiment with things. Some of those advertisers have said, all right, we're going to wait a little bit and see what happens, and we'll then select what seems to be the most successful solution for us to test before we actually have to get to that point with the cookie being deprecated. So I'd say that has become maybe a little bit of a delay since the timeline got pushed back. We would not recommend that everyone wait until the last minute to test these things. We recommend that you, well,
Start early.
some of the things that people should be doing, they should be doing now anyway, regardless of when this timeline gets deprecated. So
Right.
I'll talk about a couple things. The first being building up your first-party database. A lot of the principles a lot of the rationale for having first-party data in the first place, it holds true, whether or not the cookie's going to be deprecated, whether or not it's now 2 years from now, 5 years from now. The things you can do with abundant first-party data are numerous. The things
Right.
that are specific to this deprecation lie within the emerging technology, the emerging capability to do things like first-party site identification. So a user comes to the site. Right now, we can have a pixel on the site that looks at that user and in real time looks at their identifiers. So whatever the number of identifiers it could be, whether it's an actual cookie, an actual third-party ID, IP address, whatever it happens to be. And through deterministic and probabilistic methods, we can tie them to known users. So some sort of PII, whether that's a name, a terrestrial address, whatever it happens to be. And then that becomes persistent. A lot of advertisers don't have that in place right now, and this is something that's lacking, and they should have it in place. And so that is something that they need to test right now. That is not reliant upon some other partner's solution for targeting or solution for measurement. They need to be building up those first party databases, and they can use it for site identification. They can use it eventually for things like remarketing, regardless of what other privacy sandbox or other partner solutions come along for remarketing. They can use it for marketing. They can use it to extend digital experience into other channels like direct mail. And so there's a lot of things that can be done with first-party data that aren't relied upon this timeline. MMM. So MMM has been seen, I think, as a luxury a lot of times to advertisers. Do we have the money to afford MMM? It's not really an option anymore of do I do this or not. It's a durable solution. It is worth it in terms of being able to tell what your marketing efforts are actually returning on the back end. And so again, is that a timeline thing? I guess that one could be a little bit more of a timeline thing where we'll use cookies as long as we can. We'll use these other methods as long as you can. The issue with that, though, is that you're going to be going, if you wait any longer, you're going to be going into that without previous historical trend knowledge. So you're not going to be used to doing MMM analyses and doing optimization on that. You're not going to have that nice overlap of what do we see with cookies and MMM at the same time and understanding those trends. And so you wouldn't be wise to wait much longer on that either. I think that's a couple of things. There's something else we talked about previously. We had mentioned second-party data, and what second-party data really is someone else's first-party data. So if you're, I think I maybe used the example of like you're an airline or something, and you want to use a hotel chain's data, or you want to partner with a hotel chain. That's a good example of like second-party data, basically where you're sharing first-party data. Because of the interpretation of first-party data being what it is, where it can be, where it's the data owned from the owner's perspective, so from the pub's perspective, this is where those relationships are going to become very important too. And you're not going to want to wait until the last minute to build those partnerships. You need to start building those partnerships with pubs, with SSPs, whatever the option is that you have. You need to start doing those things now so that you're ready when the deprecation happens. Because a lot of those things aren't going to be easy to immediately start and find success with as part of putting all your eggs in that one basket. So those relationships between pubs and leveraging their first-party data, those are also becoming more prominent as a solution. So advertisers really should be looking into that as well. Part of that, when you think about going direct to a publisher, you might think about like direct buys in a contextual sense as well. So even if you don't have even if you're not going to a publisher and trying to establish a relationship with them based on their first-party data, you should be looking for opportunities based on the contextual nature of the site. So if you are, let's use hotels again, you should probably be looking for advertising opportunities with prominent sites that talk about travel blogs or whatever else there is to do. Those relationships are going to be durable,
Right.
regardless of whether it's first-party data, whether it's cookies, no matter what. So a lot of those same solutions that we recommended earlier still hold true now. Again, I'd say in some cases, advertisers are saying, well, we don't have to worry about it yet, so we won't, but that is not wise in some of these cases. First-party data, measurement solutions, those sorts of things, they still need to be doing those as quickly as possible.
Are there any last thoughts that you'd like our listeners to walk away from this episode thinking about?
People should be prepared for change, and that I can't emphasize enough. Anyone who has been in this industry in the last 6 to 12 months has gotten a very good look at how much change can occur, at how much solutions can develop, and we should not expect that to slow down. We should expect that to maintain again for the next 2 to 5 years. Hopefully things might become a bit more clear and settled and mature again after a couple years. But over the next year or two, when all these things are getting figured out, just be prepared for change. Prepare all your stakeholders for a lot of change. Keep that message going as much as possible. And trust those who are managing your campaigns and who are the experts, that they're going to be guiding you in the best way possible and communicating as much as possible about those changes. Build your first party data. I think that's the other thing I would say. Get that in place.
Seems like sound advice, preparing for change and building first party data.
Yep.
And with that, I think we're wrapping up our episode here. Ilon, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really been a pleasure.
Certainly. Glad to help.
Stay in touch and let us know what you want to hear about next by emailing us at digitalmarketingmusings@merkleinc.com.
Also, if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button and rate and review us. It helps others find our show, and please be sure to tell a friend about it as well. Until next time, I'm Andrea McCartney.
And I'm Gaia Reed. Bye.